The atmosphere in the conference room was palpably tense, as if the air pressure was about to shatter into 1,000 pieces. Fluorescent lights reflected off faces contorted in nervous smiles and furtive glances, while I, Anna Miller, observed every movement with calculated coolness. At 36, with years of experience in organizational management, I knew my title meant nothing in a space traditionally dominated by men, and that bothered me deeply. Richard Evans, my direct superior and longtime friend, stood at the front, projecting confidence while twisting the data to favor a candidate who, in my opinion, lacked a tenth of my credentials. He spoke of potential and growth, but what I saw was the preservation of his own status. The game was rigged, and I felt like an overlooked piece on a chessboard. Soon he turned to me, looking at me with an expectation that only heightened the tension in the air. "What do you think of the numbers we presented, Anna?" His question echoed in the silent room. A part of me wanted to shout, "They forgot I'm not just a figurehead, I am the change." But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I simply nodded slightly, an evasive gesture that hid the storm brewing inside me. As his words resonated, I analyzed the projections displayed on the screen. The numbers didn't add up. The trends were skewed. Every adjustment highlighted the manipulation of information, the distortion of realities. Richard mixed real data with fabricated data, a technique disguised as competence. My gaze fixed on him, noticing how calm he seemed, as if he were playing a game where the cards were clearly marked. As the meeting progressed, the heat of indignation rose through my body. It was more than a dispute over a promotion. It was a fight for truth in a system that thrived on inequality. I always knew that the corruption of power hid not only in the actions of the powerful, but also in the inaction of those who could challenge it. Reclaiming the truth would be my weapon. Finally, the meeting ended, but the tension remained, a shadow behind me as I walked to my office. My mind buzzed with solutions and strategies. I needed to act, and soon. The plan to expose Richard's manipulations couldn't be a vague idea. It had to be methodical and well-structured. I knew my organizational management skills would be essential to expose the distortions present. The phrase that inspired me so much echoed in my mind. They forgot I'm not just a figurehead. I am the change. It was a call to action. As I prepared to chart the way forward, I solidified my commitment to fight for justice, not only for myself, but for all the silenced voices in a world that had yet to learn to recognize female power. After all, what I wanted wasn't just a promotion, but to transform the underlying structure that prevented true diversity and equality. It was time to bring the truth to light, starting with the mission that was unfolding in my mind. The heavy silence following yesterday's meeting continued to echo in my mind. Every word from Richard resonated like a painful lie, stitching a feeling of betrayal into my chest. The image of the man I considered a friend deteriorated, revealing a bitter face, forged by envy and fear. How could I have been so naive? Our friendship seemed to have been a game in which I never played a part. How could I trust someone who put himself forward, disguising the treacherous maneuvers behind his usual smile? It was hard not to remember the moments that built the foundation of this relationship. Flashbacks flooded my mind. The first major presentation where I defended a bold project at a conference. All the executives applauding, standing up. Richard was by my side, encouraging me to take risks. "You were born to shine, Anna," he told me at the time, and I believed him. It was the first time I felt I had made a difference, that my voice could truly break through the impenetrable walls of prejudice that permeated our corporate environment. In the early years, he really seemed to be a bridge to success. He shared tips that had worked for him, offered advice on how to overcome the resistance of other executives. Looking back, I realized that those moments were eclipsed by the subtlety of his disloyalty. While he helped me climb one step, He secretly tried to prevent me from climbing the next. The light he had shone on my potential was also the shadow cast over me. Over time, other dynamics began to unfold. Sophia Davis, a colleague who always stayed on the sidelines, but who also fueled negative insinuations about my ability. She whispered cheeky comments to the team, as if my ideas and contributions were mere copies of something that already existed. "Oh, Anna, you only do this because you want to stand out, don't you?" she insisted playfully. But her intention was clear: to trivialize me, to reduce me to a stereotype. At the time, I chose to ignore her, thinking that achieving results would be enough to silence the critical voices around me. But as tensions in the company increased, Sophia's indifference turned into an acceptance of the status quo. I realized that many preferred to follow her cautious criticism rather than support me in the pursuit of innovation. It was easier for them to maintain the old game than to fight for necessary changes. The idea of promoting diversity now became a distant memory, a policy we were taught to embrace, but not to practice. Block 2. Reflection and Determination. Wrestling with these memories, I reflected on all the proposals I drafted in meetings, those inclusion policies that could have changed the company's narrative. Sadly, they were often ignored, dismissed by leaders who feared risking their positions for a better future. And now, seeing Richard manipulating the data he'd always pledged to review, I realized I was ready to leverage all the knowledge and experience I'd gained over time. Reflecting on all this, a renewed determination began to fill me. What had settled as frustration now transformed into powerful fuel. I wouldn't let Richard decide my fate, nor would I let Sophia continue to cast doubt on my abilities. It was time to rewrite the narrative and channel all that frustration into a clear, change-oriented direction. The reality of the corporate environment, marked by biases and deceit, couldn't remain unchanged. I would be an agent of transformation, more than a figurehead on the sidelines, finally ready to act. That day, I sat down with a notepad and began sketching a detailed plan for my next moves. Each idea that emerged was reinforced by a larger purpose, not just protecting my space, but overturning this structure that perpetuated injustice. If Richard wanted to maintain power at the cost of truth, then he would have to face the resistance rising within me. The foundations of my transformation were already being laid. I was prepared to reveal all I had learned and was capable of, and at the same time, to return to Sophia not just criticism, but a piece of her own arrogance. The lines were being drawn, and a new battle was about to begin. Ironically, that poisoned environment had also become my battlefield. The cards were on the table, and I was determined to play them with skill and precision. In the days following that disappointing meeting, I plunged into a methodical investigation of the board's recent decisions. The atmosphere in the company had become a dense web of intrigue, and my mission was to unravel it, thread by thread. The early mornings were the most productive. The office was empty, and I used the quiet to review accumulated documents. Reports and meeting minutes sprawled across my desk like a jigsaw puzzle waiting to be assembled. One morning, an alert in my inbox caught my attention. It was a message from Peter, a colleague in IT. "We need to talk. I have information about the latest project that you might find interesting." Curiosity consumed me, and despite my hesitation, I decided a meeting could be a valuable step. Walking into the cafeteria, I searched for Peter in the crowd. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the air as I spotted him, visibly anxious. Inviting him to sit with me, I empathized with his unease. As we began to talk, he revealed a growing concern about discrepancies he'd noticed in the performance data presented by Richard. "The numbers seem manipulated, Anna, and there are always whispers around the meetings," he said, his voice low, aware of being overheard. With each word he shared, my determination strengthened. Peter mentioned that Richard seemed nervous in some meetings, as if afraid the truth would be discovered. The possibility of manipulation by Richard could be exactly what I needed to build my defense. When Peter suggested I access previous reports, the urgency increased. He mentioned he could help set up system access, and I realized this was a crucial step to getting the necessary information. Returning to my office, I took a deep breath and let the adrenaline flow. I had to act. I began to map out a plan to investigate previous discussions and upper management decisions, determined to understand how far the data manipulation had gone. Each chart and each line of data became essential in my analysis as I searched for inconsistencies and contradictions in the numbers. As I analyzed, time seemed to accelerate. I realized that beneath the statistics presented by Richard was a web of falsifications that compromised not only my project, but the performance of the entire team. With each discovery, I felt more confident. The idea of compiling a detailed dossier emerged. This collection of evidence would become not just a record of data manipulation, but the basis of my fight for justice. In the following days, I delved even deeper. I dug into the analyses, extracted information from the internal system, and compared the data I obtained with what had been presented. Every detail fit together like a piece of a puzzle, revealing a bigger picture. The dossier that was beginning to form was more than a document. It was a manifesto against the injustices that permeated our company. Finally, the pressure built, and I felt the moment to act was approaching. The dossier shouldn't just present the evidence. It should also show how Richard's manipulation impacted the organization as a whole, the challenge to the genuine progress we all deserved. This material would become my trump card in the upcoming presentation, where I would confront not only Richard, but the system that supported the oppression. As I typed the final notes, a mixture of fear and empowerment filled the space around me. What was once a dark labyrinth now illuminated with the light of truth. It was time to wield my weapons and bring to light everything I had discovered. The transformation was underway, and together, Peter and I were about to expose the truth that many tried to hide. I was determined to ensure justice prevailed, and I wouldn't let Richard's betrayal and Sophia's complacency define my destiny. The cards were on the table, and I was ready to play them with precision. With the dossier nearly complete, each new discovery brought a surge of adrenaline and a renewed sense of urgency. The final pieces were finally solidifying. Now, I needed to delve deeper and gather what was missing. The final touch on my presentation would be crucial. Richard hadn't just compromised my project, he'd compromised the entire team's integrity. What I already had access to might just be the tip of the iceberg. One morning, as sunlight filtered through my office window, bringing clarity to my troubled thoughts, I decided it was time to act again. Peter and I had developed a trusting connection, and once more, I called him. Peter, could you help me access more data from the system? Something tells me I might be missing crucial information about the data Richard presented, not just in our reports, but in upper management communications. He hesitated but agreed. We met at the cafe near the company. Over coffee and croissants, we discussed the best way to extract the information, targeting the core of the problem. The atmosphere during the conversation was much lighter than our usual talks, but a palpable tension still hung in the air. We both knew we were about to cross an irreversible line. Peter showed me how to access reports not fully available to all employees. These documents are connected to our internal management platform. They have records that weren't consolidated in the performance presentations, and not everyone has permission to see what's behind the scenes, he explained as I listened intently. With a quick click, the information started appearing on the screen. With each data set I analyzed, my heart beat faster. I discovered that beyond specific manipulations in our team's statistics, there were records detailing how the data Richard consistently prioritized favored his own project, whose profitability was being boosted by an investment not reflected in the results. Peter, this is much bigger than I thought, I murmured, processing the sheer amount of information now before me. It was concrete proof that Richard was playing a double game. His decisions were more than distortions embedded in the graphs. They also benefited his position at the head of the team, leading to a serious lack of transparency. What were once easy allegations now became evidence I could present. It was time to assemble a complete dossier that would include not only the manipulations and falsifications, but also how each treacherous act reflected on our team's performance. The feeling of empowerment grew within me. Each minute it became clearer that I was fighting for much more than just my identity. I was a voice for all those who were ignored and mistreated. With the collected material and data, I quickly improvised a line of reasoning that linked all the evidence. The idea of presenting this to the directors became increasingly palpable in my mind. I went home that night, unable to escape the anxiety of what was to come. With the complete dossier in hand, the following hours were filled with revisions. The idea of presenting wasn't about getting revenge on Richard, but about fighting a system so ingrained in the corporate culture that it had become the norm. Into the early morning hours, with the glow of my screen my only company, I finalized the presentation. The conviction to confront not only Richard, but also the complacency of everyone who allowed this situation to happen remained alive. Presentation morning arrived, and the atmosphere in the boardroom was like a pressure cooker about to explode. The executives were there, but I saw them differently. Those who weren't always ready to hear the truth coming from a different source. Those who, silently, allowed Richard to dominate the truth by highlighting biased results. The awareness of what was becoming dangerous territory filled the air, similar to a battlefield. I prepared to be incisive. Each slide projected a clear image of truths long hidden. I spoke about the data, the manipulations, and the impact on the team. These distortions, I emphasized, have consequences, not only for our results, but for team morale, for the integrity of our work culture. The air grew heavier as the words unfolded. The analyses clearly showed how parameters had been manipulated. I saw familiar faces pale and look incredulous at what I was presenting as they tried to quell their own immense betrayal in witnessing the explosion of their own complacency. When I finished, the room plunged into a heavy silence. It was as if we were all awaiting the avalanche of consequences, as I waited for the truth to penetrate their minds. Then the tension broke. Richard intervened, attempting to reverse the situation, but I was ready. He could try to extinguish the flames, but by then the truth spoke for itself. If you think you can cover this up, Richard, then you underestimate the power of truth, I replied, confronting him. The look on the directors' faces began to change. Awareness was dawning, and I was prepared to fight. It was only the beginning, but the battle I had planned was becoming more real with each passing moment. Change was about to happen, and I was prepared to be the force that wouldn't be silenced against the oppression that had dominated our space. The silence in the room began to crack under the weight of the truth I'd dropped like a bomb. Expressions on the executives' faces ranged from disbelief to unease. The atmosphere was thick, as if each of them was struggling to process the implications of what had just been revealed. I could feel the tension rising, a slow burn about to ignite into a wildfire. Richard, sensing that control was slipping from his grasp, attempted a diversion. Anna, this is a skewed narrative. The data is complex, and it's easy to jump to conclusions from a limited data set, he claimed, his voice wavering slightly. But I wasn't about to let him redirect the conversation. Complexity doesn't justify manipulation, Richard, I responded, maintaining unwavering eye contact. What you did wasn't just twisting numbers, it was undermining the trust everyone here should have in each other. Our credibility and our ability to grow as a team are at stake. Each sentence that left my lips seemed to cut through the hot, tense air of the room, and I saw some directors' gazes shift towards him, a crack in his confident facade. While Richard scrambled for a response that might save him from the storm, I seized the moment to present one of my latest findings. With a click, I projected a graph onto the screen illustrating the disparity between our actual performance and what he had presented. This graph, I began, shows not just manipulation, but a series of decisions based on fraudulent data. Leadership failed in its responsibility to nurture talent and instead fostered distrust. What had been murmurs in the room were now echoes of agreement. Responses from the directors began to emerge, leaping from looks of apprehension and uncertainty to a defense of the truth. "This is unacceptable," finally declared one of the leaders, Sarah Jenkins, head of marketing, her expression laced with disappointment at having been deceived. "We need to take responsibility for what happened. The ramifications go far beyond what's on the surface." Richard squirmed in his seat, and I realized the tide was turning in my favor. He was trying to maintain his image, but the more he tried, the more evidence piled up against him, like nails hammered into his metaphorical coffin. My heart pounded as I realized the power I held. It felt like I'd illuminated a path, exposed a web of corruption that extended beyond me, beyond Richard. Unfortunately, the so-called decisions that were made not only bolstered your ego, but also harmed all of us who genuinely care about this team, I continued, painting a picture of the consequences. We need to be proactive in correcting these mistakes and rebuilding the trust that has been broken. The fervor in my voice held the executive's attention, and I could feel their transition from denial to reflection. With a plan of action beginning to take shape, I found myself outlining how we could do this together. I suggest we conduct a full audit of the data provided and that the results be presented at our next meeting with complete transparency. Let's work together to reverse this situation, not only out of respect for our inclusion policies, but out of respect for everyone here. My gaze swept the room, searching for support. Encouragement emerged silently in a series of nods. "Let's go a step further and turn this situation into a catalyst for real change," I continued, empowering the idea of a new future. "It's time to realign our values and goals, to make this a space where everyone has a voice and their talents are respected." The room began to buzz. Murmurs of approval spread like wildfire. The weight of my fight for justice was becoming a domino effect that could alter not only my trajectory, but the very culture of the company. Finally, the meeting reached its climax. Richard, once a dominant figure, now found himself surrounded by collective pressure, noticing disturbances in his kingdom of lies. "Anna, you can't just throw this out here as a bunch of accusations without real proof," he said in a last-ditch effort at defense. But the resolve in the room spoke louder. "Richard, the truth is the only way forward now," I replied, tasting victory. "The data is concrete proof of what you did, and this room is now ready to confront realities that most have avoided for too long." In that instant, a feeling of liberation washed over me. Transformation was underway, and every direction we took now was geared towards developing a safe and inclusive space. It was time to come together again, but not as the scattered figures we were, but as a cohesive whole, mindful of our surroundings. With the meeting finally adjourned and commitments made, a new journey began. The directors filed out one by one, and each of their faces became more expressive and confident as they moved away from the room, as if each was finally ready to confront their shortcomings and contribute to a different future. I felt an intense warmth of satisfaction. The feeling of having confronted oppression today and fighting for a change that many had wished for might have been stronger than any previous defeat. Underestimating the power of hidden truths had become a victory earned through courage, and it was my time to shine. Richard shot me a look of anger, but at the same time, there was a hint of respect simmering beneath the agitation. "You surprised me, Anna," he muttered through gritted teeth, and I let out a quiet smile. Truth is powerful, and now that truth was the force that had reversed not only the game, but the future of the company. The transformation I sought was underway, a journey I was no longer willing to undertake alone, but rather side by side with everyone who desired to be heard and valued. The path to justice was there, and I was ready to navigate it. The days following our decisive meeting were intense and filled with a renewed fervor. The fight for the transformation we so desperately desired could not be won in a single meeting. The idea of an inclusive and transparent corporate space pulsed in every member of our committee, and each of us was determined to promote change. We quickly established guidelines to ensure transparency in data and processes. Meetings were organized in every sector of the company, where everyone could express their opinions without fear of reprisal. We created an anonymous feedback channel, a safe space where employees could report inappropriate practices and share concerns. In the auditorium, the atmosphere vibrated with anticipation. Employees from all sectors gathered to hear about the changes we were implementing. "Today, we are here to build a different future," I declared to the crowd. "We want not only to improve the numbers, but also to align our values with our practices." This statement seemed to resonate with everyone present. As the committee progressed, the tension surrounding Richard grew. He became a restless bystander, attempting to discredit our efforts while organizing behind the scenes. I received a heads up from a colleague about his attempts to meet with senior executives, trying to regain influence and question the committee's effectiveness. I directed this information to the group. "Richard won't back down easily," I warned. "We need to be proactive and show everyone that we are committed to change." Together, we decided to organize an event celebrating the results of all we had accomplished, highlighting our progress and shared vision. On the night of the event, the auditorium was brightly lit and full of energy. The enthusiasm made my heart race. The space carried the promise of transformation and a new beginning. As we prepared the presentation, I felt the strength of the team around me. The event began with a presentation of the committee's achievements. With charts and statistics, we showed how our initiatives had positively impacted the team. When I finished, a wave of applause echoed through the room. I saw the faces of my colleagues shining with pride and expectation, and as Richard watched, it was evident that his power was slipping through his fingers. A week after the event, the work continued. The feedback channel began receiving a variety of comments, and the previously silenced voices began to be heard. The committee members were now better aligned and more motivated, but I knew I could never relax. Richard's shadow still loomed, and he was still trying to influence the conversations of some key figures. One afternoon, he attempted to criticize our progress in a meeting, insinuating that we were diverting focus from financial results in favor of an idealistic approach. Tension hung heavy in the air as he spoke, and I felt that the encouragement and support over the past few weeks had built defenses against his attempts to reverse our progress. Richard continued, "We need to ensure that our efforts translate into concrete financial results, not just talk about inclusion." The atmosphere was charged with uncertainty, and the resistance in some faces called me to action. "Richard," I said, my voice firm, The cultural change we are promoting is not a distraction. It is essential to our long-term sustainability. To ignore this reality is to perpetuate the same toxic culture that has already harmed us. The room fell silent, and my statement hung in the air between the certainty and uncertainty of how the conversation might proceed. The meeting stretched on, and I perceived the reactions slowly shifting as the voices around me began to echo my commitment to the truth. The support we had built was strengthened by a common goal: to transform our company. Over time, some executives began to speak out, praising the committee's initiatives and recognizing the importance of our direction. One of them, who had previously been hesitant, raised his hand. "I want to support this. Change is necessary, and we need to be bold regarding company culture." The feeling that we were creating a new narrative solidified with each meeting. As more and more voices joined the cause, Richard began to feel isolated, and this gave me hope. We had gathered not only data and results, but a critical mass willing to fight against oppression, manipulation, and neglect. The committee's final meeting was fast approaching, and the atmosphere of anticipation was palpable. The final event we had planned would be a reflection of everything we had accomplished. It was time to communicate to the employees the transformation we were embracing and lay the groundwork for what was to come. On the night of the event, the auditorium was packed. I looked around, feeling the energy and anticipation filling the air. The presentation was set. There were men and women who had previously hesitated but were now willing to stand up and join the movement. I presented each achievement, each step toward a more inclusive and collaborative environment. Today, we celebrate what we are collectively and commit to continuing on this journey, I declared, feeling the strength of the room build as the applause echoed. When I finished, a feeling of accomplishment washed over me. The path that had been trodden was fraught with challenges, but the important thing was that the transformation was happening, not just in numbers and data, but in human relationships and in an environment where everyone felt valued and respected. With a determined gaze, I faced Richard, now significantly diminished, unable to interrupt the surge of energy that had built between us. The foundation was set, and with it, a new future. The path to inclusion was clearer than ever, and I was ready to continue this journey alongside everyone who wanted to be heard. Change, finally, was in motion. The energy of the celebration still vibrated within me as a new day dawned. Sunlight streamed through my office window, illuminating a future brimming with promise. After months of struggle and sacrifice, the changes in the company culture were beginning to solidify, and I felt a new reality taking shape. Committee meetings had become genuine spaces for exchange and collaboration. The atmosphere of distrust that had once permeated the company was fading with each meeting, replaced by open conversations about inclusion and diversity. Employees who had once felt silenced now actively voiced their opinions, sharing experiences and challenges. At the first committee meeting after the event, a former colleague, Lucas, finally felt comfortable joining us. "I never thought I'd return to an environment like this," he said, his voice full of emotion. The warm reception to his testimony showed we were truly on a transformative path. He reflected the practices so many had faced, and the committee's acceptance showed the recovery we were giving the company culture. Everything seemed promising, but Richard was still present, increasingly isolated, attempting to discredit our efforts. In one meeting, he raised questions about the financial results, insinuating that our focus on transformation was unfounded idealism. The room, once intimidated, now pulsed with new energy, and I didn't hesitate to respond. "Richard, the cultural change we're promoting is crucial. Ignoring it means perpetuating a culture that no longer works," I said, my voice rising with confidence. My heart pounded, but the support of my colleagues beside me was a reminder that we were united. In the weeks that followed, we strengthened our core. The idea of organizing an event to celebrate our achievements and reinforce our commitment to a respectful environment began to take shape. Each meeting became more inspiring, and our unity was undeniable. The day of the forum arrived, and the auditorium was packed. I looked out at the room before beginning, feeling the excitement in the air. I presented our achievements, each step toward a more inclusive and collaborative space. Today, we celebrate the strength we found in truth and solidarity, I declared, as enthusiastic applause filled the room. When I finished, an intense wave of satisfaction washed over me. What had once been a dream was now a tangible and valuable reality. The transformation wasn't just about data, but about the human connections we were building in the process. Richard's determined glare could no longer interrupt the flow of energy between us. He was clearly diminished, and I knew we were slowly redefining what he represented. My desire to foster a more inclusive future was pulsing. Still, I couldn't ignore Richard's shadow. He had become less influential, but his attempts to discredit our new reality couldn't be underestimated. I received a warning that he was plotting to undermine our initiatives through allies in senior positions. This demanded a plan. I decided we had to act quickly. I called a committee meeting, and the tension in the air was palpable. We need to be ready to defend the changes, I declared. Transparency is necessary, especially now. Let's form a group committed to monitoring any attempts at backsliding and being the voice of truth. The proposal was met with enthusiasm, and a wave of empowerment swept through the room. Everyone agreed to remain vigilant so that the culture we had built would not only flourish, but become a lasting legacy. My thoughts revolved around all the changes we were making. The more inclusive atmosphere was becoming real, and seeing each of my colleagues actively participating in this journey inspired me to continue. Thus, I knew that even though Richard was still around, he couldn't stop the movement that had gained momentum. After all, change was an ongoing process, and we were determined to continue. As I closed the meeting, a phrase echoed in my mind. This is just the first of many victories to come, and I will not just be a figurehead, but an irreversible force. I was ready to navigate the future alongside everyone who wanted to be heard and respected. Change was finally in motion, and all I could do was move forward.